Homeless woman with baby knocks on billionaire's door on a snowy night, asking for help. And what he does is unbelievable. The office lights went out one by one. Edward ran a hand through his graying hair and looked at the computer screen, which finally showed an empty desktop. Another day had ended. He pushed his chair back and stood up slowly. His back ached after 12 hours hunched over reports and spreadsheets. The building was silent. For a long time now, he had always been the last to leave. Edward gathered the papers scattered across his desk and put them in a drawer with his usual precision. Everything in its place. Every document filed. This was how he controlled at least one part of his life. The elevator descended in silence. In the mirror of the polished walls, Edward saw the reflection of a tired man. 52 years old, hair more white than brown, eyes that no longer sparkled as they once did. When did he become like this? When did he stop caring about his own appearance? The car purred softly in the empty garage. Edward drove through the deserted city streets, passing illuminated windows where families were having dinner together. Children running through the living room, fathers helping with homework, mothers laughing in the kitchen. He looked away. The mansion appeared at the end of the wide street, imposing and dark. Only a single light at the entrance, automatically triggered when the sensor detected the car. Edward parked in the garage and walked to the back door. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The heels of his shoes against the marble created a sharp sound that repeated off the high walls. Edward loosened his tie and climbed the main staircase, holding onto the polished wooden banister. In his room, he took off his suit jacket and hung it in the closet. He took off his shoes and placed them side by side, perfectly aligned. He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, one button at a time. The routine was always the same. A quick shower, clean pajamas, a glass of water on the nightstand. Then he would sit in the armchair next to the bed and stay there for a few minutes, staring into space. The house was too quiet. There was no laughter coming from downstairs. There was no music playing in the room next door. There was no sound of the television on in the living room. There were no whispered conversations in the hallway. There was no life. Edward got up and walked to the desk in the corner of the room. It was an antique piece inherited from his father, with small drawers and brass pulls. On top of it were a few books he never opened, a lamp with a green shade, and a photo in a silver frame. He picked up the frame carefully, as if it were too fragile for his rough hands. The photo showed a girl of about 7, sitting on a swing in the backyard. Blonde hair like threads of gold fell over her shoulders, her blue eyes shining with happiness. A wide, genuine smile revealed a tooth that had fallen out the week before. Sophie. Edward ran his thumb over the glass surface, tracing the outline of his daughter's face. In the photo, she wore a yellow dress with small white flowers. He remembered that day. It was a Saturday morning, and Sophie had woken up early to play in the garden. She had run to him, asking to be pushed on the swing. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Edward smiled without realizing it. He had pushed her until she laughed so hard she almost fell off. Then she jumped from the swing and ran to her mother, who was watering the flowers near the fence. "Mommy, Daddy pushed me super high. I almost flew." His wife had laughed and said that Sophie always exaggerated, but Edward knew she hadn't. In that moment, his daughter had truly flown. And he had been a part of it. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the photo. The room was dark, lit only by the faint light coming from the street. He didn't have the courage to turn on the main light. The darkness was easier. It had been 3 years since he last saw Sophie, 3 years since she and her mother had left. 3 years since the house became empty, and he started working late every day. In the beginning, Edward thought they would come back, that it was just another fight like so many others, that his wife just wanted to scare him, to make him realize how important they were. He waited in the living room for hours, looking at the door, waiting to hear the key in the lock. But they didn't come back. The first week was the worst. Edward called dozens of times, but no one answered. He sent messages that went unanswered. He drove to his mother-in-law's house, but the curtains were drawn and no one opened the door. After a month, he stopped trying. Edward looked at the photo again. Sophie must be 10 years old now. Did she still wear her hair long? Did she still like to play in the garden? Did she still smile that way? Did she still remember her father? "I miss you so much." The words came out in a whisper, so quiet they were almost lost in the silence of the room. Edward pressed the frame against his chest and closed his eyes. The mansion was silent around him. 23 rooms, each day 5 bathrooms, a library no one used anymore, a dining room where only one chair was ever occupied. It was a house made for a large family, full of life and noise. Now it was just a museum of memories. Edward put the photo back on the desk and lay down on the bed. He pulled the covers up to his chin and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind swayed the tree branches, creating shadows that danced on the wall. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but the silence of the mansion echoed like a burden of regret and loneliness. It was always like this. Every night, the same emptiness, the same dull ache in his chest, the same question he didn't want to ask. Was it too late to fix everything? Edward sighed and turned on his side, his back to the desk. He didn't want to see the photo, he didn't want to remember what he had lost, but even with his eyes closed, he could still see Sophie's smile. He could still hear her laughter. He could still feel her weight on his lap when she was little and asked her dad to tell her a story before bed. The house remained silent, guarding its secrets and regrets like a music box that had stopped playing a long time ago. Edward woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the wind beating against the windows. He looked at the clock on the nightstand. 3:15 in the morning. Outside, the storm had begun. He got up and walked to the window. Large snowflakes were falling heavily, covering the garden with a white blanket. The trees swayed violently, and the wind howled around the corners of the house. It was the first snowstorm of the winter. Edward went back to bed but couldn't sleep. The sound of the storm made him restless. There was something different about tonight, a strange energy in the air that made him toss and turn between the sheets. He had been tossing in bed for an hour when he heard something that wasn't the wind. Knocking. Edward held his breath and listened intently. Maybe it was tree branches against the side of the house, or maybe it was the garage door, not properly closed. Knock, 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 no. It was knocking on the door. Someone was knocking on his front door at 4 in the morning, in the middle of a snowstorm. Edward got up slowly and put on his robe. He went down the main staircase holding the banister, his bare feet cold against the marble. The knocking continued, faint but persistent. Knock, knock, knock. Who could it be? Edward didn't receive visitors. He had no close friends. He had no family who cared enough to show up in the middle of the night. Maybe it was a lost salesman or someone with car trouble. Edward reached the front door and hesitated. There was no peephole. The door was old, made of solid wood with wrought iron details. He put his hand on the doorknob and took a deep breath. Who is it? Silence. Just the sound of the wind. Edward waited a few seconds and was about to go back to his room when the knocking started again. Fainter this time, almost desperate. He turned the key and opened the door. A blast of icy wind swept through the house, carrying snowflakes that stuck to his face. Edward blinked several times until he could see clearly. A young woman was standing on the porch, shivering from the cold. Wet blonde hair was stuck to her face, her blue eyes wide with desperation. She was wearing a coat far too thin for the weather and was holding something against her chest. A baby. The woman looked at Edward with an expression he hadn't seen in years, hope mixed with fear. "Please," she said, her voice almost lost in the sound of the wind. "He just needs to get warm." Edward looked at the baby in her arms. It was tiny, probably only a few months old. It was wrapped in a blanket that looked more like an old rag. The little face was red from the cold, and Edward could see the child was trembling. Edward started to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. "Please," the woman repeated, taking a step forward. "Just for a few hours, until the storm passes. I have nowhere else to go." Edward stood frozen in the doorway, holding the doorknob. His first reaction was to say no, to close the door, to go back to bed and pretend nothing had happened. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know where she came from or what she really wanted. But when he looked at the baby again, something stirred inside his chest, a familiar pain, like an old wound that had never properly healed. The woman swayed a little, and Edward realized she was exhausted, probably walking in the snow for hours, looking for shelter. The baby in her arms let out a weak cry, almost a whimper. Edward sighed and opened the door completely. "Come in." The woman didn't waste any time. She hurried past him, as if afraid Edward would change his mind. Her feet left wet tracks on the marble floor. Edward closed the door and turned the key. The sound of the wind became muffled, but it could still be heard from the corners of the house. "Thank you," the woman said, looking around the main hall. Her eyes widened slightly at the size of the place. "I'm Anna, and this is Oliver." She adjusted the baby in her arms, and Edward saw that the blanket was soaked. Oliver cried again, a sharp sound that echoed through the empty house. "He's cold," Anna said, a note of desperation in her voice. "I tried to keep him warm, but—" Edward looked at them, not knowing what to do. It had been years since he had anyone over at his house. He didn't know how to act, what to offer, where to put them. "The fireplace," he said finally. "Down in the living room. There's still firewood." Anna followed Edward down the hall to the main living room. It was a large space with dark leather sofas and a stone fireplace that took up almost an entire wall. It had been a long time since Edward had lit it. He knelt in front of the fireplace and began to arrange the wood. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't sure if from the cold or nervousness. He had forgotten how to do this properly. Anna sat on the sofa closest to the fireplace and began to unwrap Oliver from the wet blanket. The baby cried harder as the cold air touched his skin. "Shh," Anna whispered, rocking him gently. "You'll be warm soon." "Everything will be okay." Edward managed to light the fire after a few tries. The flame started small but soon grew, spreading a pleasant warmth through the room. The golden light danced on the walls, creating shadows that moved slowly. Anna moved closer to the fireplace, holding Oliver against her chest. The baby gradually stopped crying, only sobbing occasionally. Edward stood up, not knowing what to do with his hands. He looked at Anna and Oliver, then at the fire, then at the window where the snow continued to fall. "How long have you been walking in the snow?" he asked. "Since last night," Anna replied, not taking her eyes off her son. "We left the shelter when they said there was no more room. Oliver was starting to get sick, and I couldn't let—" She stopped talking and shook her head, as if trying to push away bad thoughts. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Oliver had stopped crying completely and was now looking at the flames with curiosity. His little blue eyes reflected the golden light, and Edward noticed he was a beautiful baby. Light, fine hair, rosy cheeks that were beginning to regain their normal color. Anna took off her wet coat and draped it over a chair near the fireplace to dry. Underneath, she wore a simple shirt and faded jeans. She was too thin, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. "Thank you," she said again, looking at Edward. "I know this must be strange. Strangers showing up at your door in the middle of the night." Edward didn't answer. He kept looking at the fire, trying to process what was happening. A few hours ago, the house was silent and empty as always. Now there was a woman with a baby in his living room, warming herself by his fireplace. Oliver made a little sound, almost like a laugh. Anna smiled for the first time since she arrived. "He likes the fire," she said. "It's the first time I've been somewhere warm in weeks." Edward looked at them again. Anna held Oliver so carefully, as if he were the most precious thing in the world. There was something in the way she cradled him, in the way she whispered small words of affection, that made Edward remember times he preferred to forget. The crying and the human warmth broke the emptiness of the house in a way Edward didn't know if it was good or bad. It was different. It was life entering a place that had been dead for a long time. Anna looked at Edward and smiled faintly. "It's going to be okay," she said, but Edward didn't know if she was talking to Oliver or to him. Edward woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in years, someone moving around the house. It was early. The sun hadn't fully risen, but there was enough light coming through the windows. Edward lay in bed for a few seconds, trying to identify the noises. Soft footsteps downstairs, the sound of a faucet turning on, a female voice whispering softly, humming a melody. Anna. For a moment, Edward had forgotten she was there. Last night seemed like a strange dream, the storm the knocking on the door, the woman with the baby asking for shelter. But the sounds from downstairs proved it had all really happened. Edward got up and put on his robe. He went down the main staircase, trying not to make any noise. When he reached the hall, he immediately noticed the differences. Oliver's wet blanket was no longer on the sofa. Anna's coat was also gone. Everything seemed organized and clean. He followed the sounds to the kitchen and stopped at the doorway. Anna was by the sink, carefully washing the baby's blanket. Oliver was asleep in a chair she had improvised with sofa cushions, creating a safe nest for him. The baby was wrapped in a clean towel. "Good morning," she said when she saw Edward in the doorway. "Sorry if I woke you." I tried to be as quiet as possible, but Oliver fed early and I needed to wash his things. "It's no problem," Edward replied, his voice coming out raspy. Anna dried her hands and turned to him with a shy smile. "Thank you for letting us stay the night. Really, thank you. Oliver slept better than he has in weeks." It was the first time he's been able to truly rest since we left the last shelter. Edward just nodded. He wasn't used to such sincere gratitude. "Do you want some coffee?" Anna asked, pointing to the coffee maker that was already emitting a delicious aroma. "I found the ground coffee in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind." Edward was surprised. It had been years since someone had offered him coffee in his own home. "You can make some," he said. Anna smiled and served 2 cups. Edward noticed that she had tidied up much more than he had imagined. The dishes from the previous night were clean and put away. The table was organized. The dish towels were folded perfectly. Even the floor seemed shinier. "You didn't have to clean everything," Edward said. "I wanted to help," Anna replied. "It's the least I can do after your generosity. You saved us last night." Oliver stirred in his chair and opened his little blue eyes. When he saw Edward, he stared with curiosity, without crying or showing fear. "He's much better," Anna said. A warm night made all the difference. "He hasn't been coughing like this for days." Edward watched Oliver. In the morning light, the baby looked even more beautiful. Blonde hair shining like threads of gold, light blue eyes, rosy cheeks that had regained their normal color. The coffee was perfect. Edward noticed Anna savoring each sip slowly, as if it was something special. "How long has it been since you've had coffee with someone?" she asked. Edward thought for a moment. He couldn't remember. "A long time," he admitted. "A very long time." They drank in comfortable silence. Edward observed the small changes Anna had made. They weren't big or invasive. They were small adjustments that made the space feel more welcoming. The curtains were open, letting in more light. The spices were organized by height. Even the way she had folded the towels gave it a homier feel. "Do you work?" Anna asked. "Yes, I have to leave in an hour." Anna nodded. "We'll leave as soon as the snow stops," she said, looking out the window. "We don't want to be any more trouble." "You've already done so much for us." Edward looked outside. The storm had passed, but the ground was still covered in snow. The streets would probably be impassable for hours. "There's no rush," he said, surprising himself. "The snow is still too deep." Anna smiled. It was a genuine, unforced smile. Edward went upstairs to get ready, following his morning routine. But even doing the same things as always, everything felt different. There were sounds coming from downstairs. There was life in the house. There was someone waiting for him when he came down. When he came down, dressed to leave, Anna was in the living room folding Oliver's blanket, which had dried. She had lit the fireplace, and the room was warm and cozy. "See you later," Edward said, grabbing his keys. "Thank you again," Anna replied. "For everything." Edward left with a strange feeling. It was as if something fundamental had changed overnight, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. At the office, Edward tried to focus on the reports, but his thoughts kept drifting back home. Would Anna and Oliver still be there when he got back? Had they found another place to stay? And why, for the first time in years, did these questions actually matter? During his lunch break, Edward did something he hadn't done in years. He went out to buy a few things. He stopped at a drugstore and bought diapers, formula and basic baby medicine. He didn't know why he was doing it. He just felt like he should. At the grocery store, he bought fresh ingredients, vegetables, fruit, quality meat, things he hadn't bought in years because he always ate alone. But today, It seemed important to have real food at home. When he returned in the late afternoon, the house was not empty. Edward heard soft music coming from the kitchen. It was a gentle melody from the radio. There was a wonderful smell in the air. He found Anna preparing something on the stove. Oliver was in her lap, watching the pots with fascination. Anna swayed gently as she cooked, making Oliver smile and babble. "Hi," she said when she saw Edward. "I hope you don't mind. I found some ingredients and thought I'd make dinner, to thank you for letting us stay another day." Edward looked around. The transformation was impressive. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the table. She must have picked them from the garden despite the snow. The curtains were open, maximizing the light. The table was carefully set for 2 folded napkins, gleaming glasses. "You didn't have to," Edward said, placing the bags on the counter. "I wanted to," Anna replied. "How long has it been since you've had a home-cooked meal?" Edward didn't answer because he didn't know he lived on sandwiches and frozen dinners. Anna saw the bags and looked curious. "So what did you buy?" Edward felt embarrassed. "A few things for Oliver, and ingredients for food." Anna opened a bag and saw the diapers and formula. Her eyes filled with tears. "Edward, you didn't have to. This must have been expensive. I have no way to pay you back." "It was nothing," he said, avoiding her gaze. "And you don't need to pay me back." "Thank you," Anna said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, Anna said. "Oliver just finished feeding, so he should be asleep soon." Edward went upstairs to change. When he came down, Anna had placed Oliver in his cushion nest. The baby was sleeping peacefully. The table looked beautiful. Anna had lit candles, creating a cozy atmosphere. A steaming plate of stew smelled of homemade spices. "Have a seat," Anna said, pulling out a chair for him. Edward sat down, feeling uncomfortable. It had been so long since he had eaten a proper meal at the table. "This is delicious," he said, after the first bite. And it was true. Anna beamed with pride. "My grandmother taught me this recipe. She always said that food made with love always tastes better." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Edward noticed how slowly Anna ate, savoring every bite. It was obvious she hadn't had a full meal in a long time. As they ate, Edward observed the changes Anna had made. She had organized without being intrusive, respecting his things but bringing life to the space. The spices arranged sensibly, the plants in the window looking more alive. It was amazing how one person could transform a space just by caring for it with affection. "Do you live alone in such a big house?" Anna asked suddenly. The question caught Edward off guard. He stopped eating and looked down, feeling the familiar pain settle in. "Not always," he replied, his voice growing quieter. "I had a wife and a daughter, but they left." The pain was evident in his voice. Anna noticed his discomfort. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to be nosy." "It's okay," Edward murmured, continuing to stare at his plate. Anna changed the subject, talking about how calm Oliver had been during the day, how he had been fascinated by the flames in the fireplace, how he seemed to like the music from the radio. Edward listened, but part of his mind was elsewhere, thinking about dinners like this one years ago when his family was whole, Sophie talking about school, his wife laughing at their daughter's stories, the table always full of life. "Edward?" Anna said, and he realized he had gotten lost in his thoughts. "Sorry," he said. "I was thinking about something else." "The house must be very quiet when you're alone," Anna observed. Edward looked around. She was right. With Anna and Oliver here, the house felt completely different. There was real life. "It is," he admitted. "Very quiet." "Your daughter, how old is she?" Anna asked carefully. 10, Edward answered automatically, then corrected himself. "I mean, she must be 10 now. It's been 3 years since I've seen her." Anna stopped pouring her water and looked at him. 3 years is a long time," she said softly. "It is," Edward agreed, his voice barely a whisper. Oliver stirred in his sleep and made a little noise. Anna immediately looked over at him, checking to see if he was okay. When she saw he was still sleeping, she turned her attention back to Edward. "Do you miss her a lot?" Anna asked. Edward closed his eyes for a moment. Every day, he admitted. Every single day for the past 3 years. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. Anna said nothing, but Edward felt she understood. There was something in the way she looked at Oliver that showed she knew what it meant to love someone more than life itself. They finished dinner in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had experienced loss and understood that some pains are too deep for words. Anna stood up to wash the dishes, but Edward stopped her. "Leave it," he said. "You've already done too much today." Edward washed the dishes, thinking about the experience, about how good it was to have company, about how different the house felt with people living in it. When he finished, he found Anna in the living room, sitting on the sofa near the fireplace. Oliver was awake in her lap, watching the flames with fascination. "He really loves these flames," Anna said. "He gets completely mesmerized." Edward sat in a nearby armchair and watched the two of them. Oliver was drooling a little and making soft sounds, as if he were talking to the fire. Oliver started to get fussy. Anna stood up and began to walk around the room, rocking him gently. "I think it's bath time," she said. "He always calms down after his evening bath." "The little bathtub is still upstairs," Edward offered. "Thank you," Anna smiled. "You continue to be very kind." Edward stayed in the living room after Anna went upstairs. He heard her footsteps on the floor above, the sound of running water, her soft voice talking to the baby during his bath. These were sounds his house hadn't heard in years, sounds of family, of care, of love. Edward was starting to relax when he heard Oliver begin to cry from upstairs. But it wasn't a normal cry. It was different, weaker and more persistent, as if something was wrong. He heard Anna moving quickly, trying to soothe her son, but the crying continued, getting worse. Edward went up the stairs, worried, and found Anna pacing nervously in the hallway, holding Oliver against her chest. The baby was red and sweaty, crying in a pained way. "What happened?" Edward asked. "He has a fever," Anna said, her voice filled with worry. "It started after his bath. It must have been the cold from being out in the snow yesterday." Edward came closer and touched Oliver's forehead. It was far too hot. "He needs a doctor," Edward said. "I know," Anna replied, tears in her eyes, "but I don't have money for a visit. And with this snow, I don't know how I'd get to the hospital." Edward saw the desperation on Anna's face. He saw how she held Oliver so carefully, as if she could transfer her own strength to her son. He saw a mother doing everything to protect her child, even without resources. This was exactly how he should have protected Sophie. "But you two are staying here," Edward said suddenly, "until he's better. I'll call my family doctor first thing in the morning." Anna stopped pacing and looked at him, surprised. "Edward, I can't accept that. You've already done so much for us. I can't keep abusing your kindness." "You can stay," he repeated firmly. "Our sick child can't be without proper medical care." Anna started to cry with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Edward said. "I'm going to get some basic medicine. Maybe it will help until the doctor arrives." They spent the night taking turns caring for Oliver. Anna slept for a few hours while Edward watched the baby. Then it was her turn to stay awake while he dozed in the chair. For the first time in 3 years, Edward fell asleep knowing he wasn't completely alone. There were people who depended on him, who trusted him, who needed his help. It was frightening and comforting at the same time. When the sun rose, Oliver was better. The fever had gone down, and he smiled at Anna again when he woke up. Edward realized that something had changed in him during that night, caring for Oliver, seeing Anna fight for her son, feeling useful again. All of it had awakened feelings he thought were lost forever, the desire to protect, the desire to care, the desire to be important in someone's life, the desire to be a father again. It was the 4th night that Anna and Oliver were at the house. The baby's fever had completely subsided by the 2nd day, thanks to the care of the doctor Edward had called. But when Anna mentioned they would be leaving, Edward insisted they stay at least until Oliver was fully recovered. The truth was, he didn't want them to leave. Edward came home earlier that day. He found Anna in the kitchen preparing dinner, as had become their routine. Oliver was sleeping peacefully in his cushion nest, breathing normally. "How is he today?" Edward asked, taking off his jacket. "Much better," Anna smiled. "He played all afternoon, even tried to crawl a little." Edward walked over and looked at Oliver. The baby looked healthy and rosy, completely different from the feverish child of a few days ago. "The doctor said he can travel whenever you want," Edward commented, trying to sound casual. Anna stopped stirring the pot and looked at him. "I know. We'll leave tomorrow. You've already done so much for us." Edward felt a tightness in his chest, but just nodded. Dinner was quieter than usual. Anna seemed thoughtful, looking at Oliver, who was happily drooling in his makeshift chair. Edward ate slowly, trying not to think about how empty the house would be again. After dinner, they went to the living room as they always did. Anna sat on the sofa with Oliver in her lap, and Edward sat in the armchair by the fireplace. The fire crackled softly, creating a cozy atmosphere. Oliver was more active than in recent days, trying to grab the flames with his little hands. Anna held him carefully, laughing at his efforts. "He's going to miss the fire," she said. "And the house. He's never had so much space for himself." Edward watched the two of them. Anna was wearing one of the old shirts he had offered her, too big for her but clean and comfortable. Her blonde hair was loose, shining in the firelight. Oliver was wearing clean clothes that Edward had bought. "You don't have to leave tomorrow," Edward said suddenly. Anna looked at him, surprised. "Edward, you've been so kind. We can't impose on your hospitality any longer." "It's not an imposition," he replied. "The house is big. There's plenty of room." Anna was silent for a moment, gently rocking Oliver. "Why are you being so good to us?" she asked. "You barely know us," Edward thought before answering. "Maybe because you remind me that I can still be useful to someone." Anna smiled sadly. "You're a good man, Edward. Anyone can see that." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Oliver started to get sleepy, his little eyes blinking slowly. Anna rocked him with gentle movements, whispering a soft lullaby. "How did you end up on the street with him?" Edward asked softly. "If you don't mind telling me." Anna paused her rocking for a moment. She looked at the fire as if deciding how much to reveal. "The story isn't very pretty," she said finally. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," Edward offered. "No, it's okay. Maybe it will be good to talk about it with someone." Anna adjusted Oliver in her lap and sighed. "I met Oliver's father at work. I was a receptionist at a small company. He was married, but he said he was going to get a divorce. I believed him." Edward listened in silence, without judgment. "When I found out I was pregnant, I told him. That's when I learned the truth. He never had any intention of leaving his wife. He said it was my problem, that he had nothing to do with it." Anna clutched Oliver against her chest as if wanting to protect him from the harsh words. "My parents, they didn't approve. They said I had gotten myself into a mess and had to solve it on my own. My sister tried to help me at first, but her husband didn't like the situation." Edward felt anger rising inside him. How could someone abandon a pregnant woman? How could a family turn its back on its own daughter? "I lost my job when my belly started to show," Anna continued. "The boss said it wasn't a good image for the company. I tried to find another job, but it was hard. Pregnant, without references, without support from anyone." Oliver yawned and snuggled closer into his mother's lap. Anna looked at him with infinite love. "When Oliver was born, things got worse. Daycare is expensive, so is a babysitter. How could I work if I had nowhere to leave him? How could I pay for daycare without a job?" Edward had never thought about these difficulties. For him, having children had always been natural. He had money, he had a wife, he had a support system. "I ended up losing the apartment I was renting," Anna said, her voice lower. "First I went to a shelter, but there are rules and schedules. And there isn't always a spot." She paused for a moment, stroking Oliver's little head. "After that it was the street. Some days I could stay at an acquaintance's house, but never for long. People have their own lives, their own problems." Edward imagined Anna pregnant, then with a small baby, having to sleep outside. The image made him furious and sad at the same time. "The worst part was the hunger," Anna continued, her voice barely a whisper. Mine, not his. I always managed to get milk for Oliver, even if it was my last bit of money, even if it meant I wouldn't eat that day. Edward closed his eyes. He couldn't imagine the desperation she must have felt. Many times I went without food so he would have something in his stomach, Anna said. I lost a lot of weight, I was weak. But he needed to nurse. He needed to grow up healthy. How did you endure it? Edward asked, his voice choked. Anna looked at Oliver, who was sleeping peacefully. I only didn't give up because he depends on me. He didn't ask to be born into this situation. It's not his fault his father is a coward. It's not his fault I made bad choices. Edward looked at Anna with admiration. She had been through things he couldn't even imagine, but she hadn't given up. She had fought for her son even when everything seemed lost. You are very strong, he said. I don't feel strong, Anna replied. I feel tired. Tired of fighting, of being scared, of not knowing where we'll sleep tomorrow. Edward felt something stirring inside his chest. It was an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just pity or sympathy, it was real empathy. It was the genuine desire to help, to protect, to make a difference in someone's life. You don't have to be scared anymore, he said softly. Not while you're here. Anna looked at him with tears in her eyes. Edward, you don't understand. I can't depend on the kindness of others forever. I need to find a way to manage on my own. And you will, Edward said, but it doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. Anna remained silent, looking at Oliver sleeping soundly. Why do you want to help us so much? She asked. Edward thought about the question. Why did he really want to help? Maybe because Anna reminded him that there was still kindness in the world. Maybe because caring for them made him feel useful again. Or maybe because, for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Because you make me remember what's important, he answered honestly. What really matters in life. Anna smiled through her tears. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For giving us a home, even if it's temporary. Edward looked at her holding Oliver, both of them illuminated by the soft light of the fireplace. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness and regret. He felt hope. And for the first time in a long time, Edward understood what it truly meant to care for someone other than himself. In the days that followed the intimate conversation about Anna's past, something shifted in the dynamic of the house, but not in the way Edward expected. Instead of feeling closer to Anna and Oliver, he began to pull away. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the feeling that he was getting too attached to a situation that couldn't last forever. Or perhaps it was the self-preservation instinct he had developed over 3 years of solitude. Edward returned to his rigid work routine with desperate intensity. He left the house before dawn and returned after nightfall. He would arrive just in time for a quick dinner, make a polite comment about Oliver, and then retreat to his office, claiming urgent work. The first morning he did this, Anna seemed to understand. Edward had been overly generous, and now he needed to get back to his normal life. She made coffee as usual, tidied the kitchen, cared for Oliver, and waited for Edward to show up for breakfast. But Edward only came down to grab a quick cup. I'll be late tonight, he said, avoiding looking at Anna. I have an important meeting. Anna smiled and nodded, holding Oliver, who was trying to reach for Edward with his little hands outstretched. No problem. We'll manage here. Edward left without looking back, not noticing how Oliver followed him with his eyes until he disappeared. The second day, the same thing. Edward came down in a hurry, drank his coffee standing up, muttered something about tight deadlines, and left Anna alone in the kitchen she had turned into a home. On the third day, Anna was no longer in the kitchen when Edward came down. She was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with Oliver in her lap, looking out the window. Edward prepared his own coffee and was leaving when she spoke. Edward? He stopped, his back still to her. Yes? Is everything okay? You seem distant. Edward turned slowly. Anna was looking at him with genuine concern, and Oliver was babbling happily, oblivious to the tension in the air. I'm fine, Edward lied. But just a lot of work. Anna nodded, but her eyes showed she didn't quite believe him. Edward continued this routine for the next few days. Work, work, work. as if the number of hours in the office could create a barrier between him and the feelings that Anna and Oliver stirred. But the strategy wasn't working. The more Edward tried to pull away, the more he thought about them during the day. He imagined Anna preparing lunch alone. He imagined Oliver trying to crawl through the empty house. He imagined the two of them playing in the living room with no one to watch the baby's progress. And when he came home late at night, he saw the signs that life had gone on without him. Improvised toys scattered around the living room. The smell of home-cooked food still lingering in the air. Oliver sleeping soundly, having grown a little more each day. Edward ate dinner alone in the kitchen, reheating the food Anna had left for him in the microwave. He ate in silence, trying not to think about how much better the food tasted when they ate together. Anna would always appear in the kitchen while he ate, offering company or asking about his day. But the conversations became shorter, more superficial. Edward would respond in monosyllables, claim he was tired, and go up to his room before the conversation could deepen. It was on a Thursday that the situation reached its breaking point. Edward came home even later than usual. He had stayed at the office until almost 10 at night, reorganizing unnecessary files, reviewing perfect reports, anything to avoid coming home and dealing with the confusing mess of feelings. When he opened the door, the house was quieter than usual. There was no soft music coming from the kitchen, no sound from the television in the living room. Not even the happy babbling of Oliver. Edward found a covered plate on the counter with a note in Anna's delicate handwriting. "Your dinner is in the oven. Just heat for 5 minutes." He heated the food and sat at the table alone. The silence of the house seemed heavier than usual, more oppressive. It was as if the life that Anna and Oliver had brought was fading away. Edward was finishing his meal when Anna appeared in the kitchen. She was wearing an old robe he had given her, and her blonde hair was tied in a messy bun. She looked tired. "How was your day?" she asked, but her voice lacked its usual cheerfulness. "Long," Edward replied, not looking at her. "Not." Anna poured herself a glass of water and stood by the sink, as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. "Edward," she said finally, "can I talk to you about something?" Edward stopped eating and looked at her. There was something different in her posture, a sad determination. "Of course." Anna took a deep breath before speaking. "I know you've been very generous to us, more generous than anyone would be, but I've realized that maybe our presence here is bothering you." Edward frowned. "Why would you say that?" "You've changed," Anna said simply. "In the first few days, you had dinner with us, you talked, you seemed to enjoy having us here. Now you leave before dawn and come back after dark. You barely speak to us." Edward looked down at his plate. He didn't know what to say because Anna was right. "I understand," Anna continued, her voice softer. "You have your life, your habits. It can't be easy having strangers in your house, messing up your routine." "You're not strangers," Edward said automatically. Anna smiled sadly. "Yes, we are, Edward, and that's okay. You've already done much more for us than you were obligated to. Oliver is healthy. I've managed to rest. I think it's time for us to move on." Edward felt an icy sensation spread through his chest. "Move on to where?" "I don't know yet," Anna admitted, "but we'll figure something out." "We always do." Edward looked at Anna standing there in the kitchen, wearing his old clothes, talking about leaving for an uncertain future with a 6-month-old baby. The image of Oliver sleeping on the street, cold, flashed through his mind like a horror movie. "Maybe it's better if I leave," Anna said, filling the silence. "I don't want to be a burden." The words hit Edward like a punch to the gut. He stood up from the chair so abruptly it almost tipped over. "No," he said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. Anna looked at him, surprised. "Edward." "Don't go," he repeated, his voice lower but just as intense. "I don't want to be alone again. I like having you here." Anna stood still, holding the glass of water, looking at Edward as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "But you've been avoiding us," she said. "I thought—" "You thought wrong," Edward interrupted. "You thought wrong." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. "I have been avoiding you," he admitted. Gab, not because I don't want you here. It's the opposite. It's because I like having you here too much. Anna placed the glass on the sink and looked at him intently. I don't understand. Edward sighed. It was the first time in 3 years he had tried to explain his feelings to someone. When you arrived, I was dead inside, he began. I felt nothing but emptiness. I had no reason to wake up in the morning besides work. I had nothing to look forward to when I came home. Anna listened in silence. You changed that, Edward continued. Suddenly, I had a reason to come home. Someone waiting for me. Conversations during dinner. The sounds of life in the house. And that scared me. Why did it scare you? Edward looked down at his own hands. Because I've lost a family before. Because I know how much it hurts when the people you love leave. And I don't know if I can go through that again. Anna moved closer slowly and sat in the chair next to his. So you preferred to pull away first, she said, understanding. Before we left on our own? Edward nodded, feeling exposed and vulnerable. But we weren't going to leave, Anna said softly. At least, we didn't want to. You gave us a home, Edward. For the first time in months, Oliver and I felt safe. Edward looked at her. Her blue eyes shone in the soft kitchen light. I'm scared, he admitted. They're scared of getting attached and then losing you too. Life has no guarantees, Anna said. But that doesn't mean we should avoid the good things just because we're afraid they'll end. Edward was silent, processing her words. Do you really want to stay? He asked. Even knowing I'm a complicated man, with problems I don't even understand myself. Anna smiled for the first time in their conversation. Especially because of that, she said. Perfect people are boring. And besides, Oliver likes you. How do you know? Because he stares at the door every morning, waiting for you to come back. And because he smiles when he hears your voice. Edward felt something warm spreading through his chest. And you? He asked. Do you also stare at the door? Anna blushed slightly. Sometimes, she admitted. Edward smiled, and it was the first time in a week that he had truly smiled. Then let's go to the living room, he said. Light the fire. Talk properly. Anna agreed, and they went to the living room together. Edward lit the fire while Anna checked if Oliver was still sleeping soundly. The baby was breathing softly in his cushion nest. They sat on the sofa, side by side, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. It was the first time they had been so physically close, and Edward could feel the warmth of her body next to his. Anna, he said after a few minutes of comfortable silence, can I tell you something? Of course. Edward looked at the fire, gathering his courage. I lost my family, he began. My wife and my daughter. They didn't die, but they left because of me. Anna said nothing, just listened. I was obsessed with work, Edward continued. I thought that by being successful, by making a lot of money, I was being a good husband and father. But in reality, I was just running away from home. Why were you running away? Edward thought before answering. I think I was afraid of not being good enough, afraid I didn't know how to be a real father, so I hid in my work, where I knew I was competent. Anna nodded, understanding. My wife tried to talk to me several times, Edward said. She said Sophie missed me, that she missed me, but I always had an excuse. An important project, an urgent meeting, a tight deadline. Edward paused, lost in painful memories. What happened? Anna asked softly. Sophie had a presentation at school, Edward said. His voice choked. It was for her science project. She asked me to go, said all the other kids would have their parents there. I promised I would go. Anna already knew how this would end. But I didn't go, Edward confirmed. A last-minute meeting came up. I thought it was more important, that Sophie would understand. And did she? Edward shook his head. She cried all night. My wife said it was the last straw, that I always chose work over family. And she was right. They were silent for a few minutes. Edward felt as if he had opened an old wound, but he also felt a sense of relief for finally talking about it. They left a week later, he continued. My wife said they needed some time to think, that maybe I needed to decide what I really wanted from life. And did you decide? Edward laughed without humor. I decided to bury myself even deeper in work. I thought if I worked more, made more money, they would come back, that I could make up for everything with professional success. But they didn't come back. They didn't come back. And now, it's been 3 years since I've seen my daughter. 3 years that she's been growing up without me. Edward looked at the sleeping Oliver. Seeing you with Oliver, seeing how you care for him, how you would do anything for him, it makes me realize how foolish I was, how much I wasted. Anna placed her hand on his arm. It's not too late, she said. Edward looked at her. How can you be so sure? Because I see who you really are, Anna answered. You took us in when we were desperate. You cared for Oliver when he was sick. You gave us a home when we had nothing. Edward shook his head. That's easy. You two are easy to love. My family. I've already ruined everything with them. Anna held his gaze firmly. Edward, she said, I know how it hurts to lose family. My parents rejected me. My sister abandoned me. But I also know that people can change, that situations can change. What if I can't change? Edward asked, his voice barely a whisper. I lost my family, and I'm afraid I can't change. Anna turned on the sofa to face him. Afraid of trying to win my family back and failing again, Edward continued. Afraid of hurting Sophie even more. Anna held his gaze with an intensity he hadn't expected. Edward, she said firmly, I see a good man in you, a man who cares, who has love to give, who can be a wonderful father. But the change depends only on you. Anna's words hit him like a lightning bolt. No one had believed in him like that in a long time. No one had seen potential in him when he couldn't see it himself. Do you really believe I can change? He asked. I believe you are already changing, Anna replied. You opened your home to strangers. You cared for a sick baby. You cared about us when no one else did. That's not the work of a bad man, Edward. Edward felt tears stinging his eyes. It had been so long since he had cried. I don't know where to start, he admitted. Start small, Anna suggested. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Choose to be present instead of running away. Choose to care instead of protecting yourself. Edward looked at the sleeping Oliver, then at Anna, who was watching him with hope in her eyes. And if I can change, he said slowly, if I can become a better man. Do you think my daughter would forgive me? Anna smiled tenderly. I think children are more willing to forgive than adults, she said. Especially when they see that their father has really changed. Edward nodded, feeling something like hope growing in his chest for the first time in years. Thank you, he said, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You're welcome, Anna replied. That's what families do. They support each other. The word family hung in the air between them, charged with meaning and possibility. Edward looked at Anna, at Oliver, at the house that had come to life with their presence. For the first time in 3 years, he could imagine a different future. A future where he was present, where he cared, where he didn't run away from good things for fear of losing them. It was a frightening future, but also full of hope. And for the first time in a long time, Edward was willing to fight for it. The change didn't happen overnight. Edward had spent 3 years building walls around his heart, and tearing them down required time and courage. But after the intimate conversation with Anna in front of the fireplace, something fundamental had broken inside him. The next morning, for the first time in a week, Edward came down for breakfast at home. Anna was in the kitchen as usual, preparing coffee and caring for Oliver, who was babbling happily in his improvised chair. When she saw Edward appear in the doorway, wearing casual clothes instead of his usual suit, she smiled with surprise. Good morning, Edward said, sitting at the table instead of grabbing his coffee and running out. Good morning, Anna replied. I'm not going to work today. I am, but later, Edward said. I thought I'd work from home this morning. Oliver stretched his little arms towards Edward, making happy sounds. Anna laughed. I think he missed you. Edward looked at the baby, then at Anna. Can I hold him? Anna was surprised by the request, but she smiled. Of course. He'll love that. Edward approached slowly. Anna picked up Oliver and carefully placed him in Edward's arms. The baby was lighter than he expected, but also more solid, more real. "Support his head," Anna instructed. Edward looked at Oliver in his arms. The baby watched him with huge blue eyes, without fear, only curiosity. Suddenly, Oliver smiled, a toothless grin that lit up his little face. "He smiled at me," Edward said, amazed. "He likes you," Anna said. "He always has." Oliver started making little noises, pointing towards the fireplace flames that could be seen from the kitchen. Edward stood up, still holding the baby. "I want to see the fire," he asked Oliver, as if the baby could answer. They went into the living room, Anna following them. Edward sat on the sofa with Oliver in his lap, both looking at the flames. The baby was fascinated, trying to grab the fire with his little hands. "Careful, it's hot," Edward said softly, holding Oliver's small hands. Anna sat beside them, watching the interaction. There was something touching about seeing Edward be so gentle and careful with a baby. "You're a natural with him," she commented. "I don't feel like a natural," Edward admitted. "I feel like I'm going to break him at any moment." Oliver yawned and snuggled closer into Edward's lap. The baby seemed completely relaxed, trusting. When Oliver fell asleep in his lap, Edward didn't want to move him. "You can put him in his cushion nest," Anna suggested. "Let him stay here a little longer," Edward requested. "He seems comfortable." Anna smiled and settled back on the sofa. It was the first time Edward had chosen to stay home instead of going to work. "You know what's strange?" Edward said after a while. "What? This house has always been quiet. Even when my family lived here, I was hardly ever present to hear the sounds of life. Now, for the first time, I can really hear them." Anna listened for a moment. There was the soft crackling of the fireplace, Oliver's peaceful breathing, the distant sound of birds outside. "And what do you hear?" Edward smiled, and it was a different smile from the ones Anna had seen before. It was lighter, more genuine. "Peace," he said. "For the first time in years, I hear peace." When Oliver woke from his nap, Edward offered to help with lunch. Anna taught him how to warm the bottle to the right temperature and how to hold Oliver so he could feed comfortably. "Like this," Anna said, adjusting the position of Edward's arms. "See how he stops crying when he feels safe." Edward watched Oliver feeding calmly in his lap. The baby looked up at him as he drank from the bottle, a tiny hand resting on Edward's arm. "It's amazing how he trusts," Edward commented. "He barely knows me, but he trusts completely." In the afternoon, Edward stayed home playing with Oliver on the living room rug. The baby tried to crawl, managing to move only a few inches before giving up and looking at Edward as if asking for help. "Come on, you can do it," Edward encouraged. Oliver made a heroic effort, managed to move a few more inches, and then collapsed onto the rug with a dramatic sigh. Edward laughed, a genuine and spontaneous laugh. Anna, watching from the kitchen doorway, smiled at the sound. It was the first time she had heard Edward truly laugh. "What is it?" Edward asked, noticing her gaze. It's good to hear you laugh." Edward realized she was right. It had been so long since he had laughed that he had forgotten the feeling. It was liberating. At dinner that night, Edward helped Anna set the table. They cooked together, she teaching, he learning. Oliver sat in his improvised high chair, clapping his hands whenever the adults did something that amused him. "He's applauding us," Edward said, laughing again. "He's our most loyal audience," Anna agreed. During dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Edward told stories from his childhood. Anna talked about her dreams for Oliver. They were simple conversations, but Edward couldn't remember the last time he had felt so at ease. After dinner, they went to the living room. Edward picked up Oliver without Anna needing to suggest it. The baby settled in comfortably, playing with the buttons on Edward's shirt. "You've changed," Anna said suddenly. Edward looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You're lighter, less tense, as if a weight has been lifted from your shoulders." Edward thought about it. She was right. For the first time in years, he didn't feel that constant pressure in his chest. "For 3 years, I thought I would never be happy again," he said. "I thought I had lost that ability forever. And now," Edward looked at Oliver, who was yawning in his lap, then at Anna. Now I feel like I'm waking up from a very long sleep. Anna smiled. Well, you're welcome back to the land of the living, said Edward. Edward laughed softly, careful not to wake Oliver. It's good to be back. That night, as he went up to his room, Edward paused on the stairs and looked back. The living room lights were still on, the cushions were messy, traces of a family evening remained. The house was no longer silent, it was no longer cold. The mansion had come to life, and along with it, so had Edward. 2 weeks had passed since Edward started to change. 2 weeks of mornings at home, family dinners, genuine laughter, and conversations that lasted late into the night. The mansion had been completely transformed, and Edward felt as if he were rediscovering who he really was. On a Saturday morning, while watching Anna teach Oliver how to clap, Edward felt a familiar pang in his chest. Sophie must have gone through these stages as a baby too. First smiles, first words, first steps, and he had missed most of those moments. What are you thinking about? Anna asked, noticing his distant expression. Edward looked at Oliver, who was babbling happily in her lap. About Sophie, he admitted, about everything I missed with her. Anna adjusted Oliver on her lap. You haven't missed everything, Edward. She's still out there. She's still your daughter. But it's been 3 years, Edward said, his voice heavy with pain. 3 years she's been growing up without me. Kids do grow up, Anna agreed. But the love between a father and daughter doesn't just disappear. It might be hidden, hurt, but it doesn't disappear. Edward remained silent, watching Oliver try to grab his own feet. The baby seemed so happy, so confident in the love he received. You should call her, Anna said softly. Edward looked at her, startled. Call her after 3 years of silence. Why not? The worst that can happen is she doesn't want to talk. But what if she does? What if she hates me? Edward asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anna stood up and placed Oliver in his cushion nest. Then she sat down next to Edward on the sofa. Edward, you've spent the last few weeks learning to be a father again. I've seen you with Oliver. I've seen how caring, attentive, and present you are. Sophie deserves to know this man. Edward shook his head. But I failed her so much. All parents fail sometimes, Anna said. The difference is that some give up and others try to fix it. Which type of father do you want to be? Edward looked down at his hands. Anna was right. For 3 years he had used pain as an excuse not to try. Do you really think I should call? I think you should try, Anna replied. At least so she knows you're thinking of her. Edward took a deep breath. The idea of hearing Sophie's voice again terrified and excited him at the same time. Would you be here? Edward asked. When I call. If you want me to, yes. Edward nodded and went to get his phone. His hands were trembling as he searched for the number he had dialed so many times in the first few months after the separation. He returned to the living room and sat on the sofa next to Anna. He stared at the phone as if it were a bomb about to explode. You can do this, Anna said softly. Edward took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Edward was starting to think no one would answer when he heard a voice he recognized immediately. Hello. It was Sophie. Her voice was different, more mature, but it was definitely her. Edward felt his heart race. Sophie, he said, his voice coming out hoarse. Silence on the other end. A long, tense silence. Dad, Sophie said finally, and there was surprise in her voice. Yes, honey, it's Dad, Edward said, trying to control his emotions. I wanted to see you. Another silence. Edward could hear Sophie breathing on the other end, as if she were trying to decide what to do. Sophie, are you there? I'm here, she replied, but her voice sounded more distant. I know it's been a long time, Edward began. I know that I wasn't the father you deserved, but I've changed, Sophie. I've really changed and... Dad, stop, Sophie interrupted him. Edward stopped talking, his heart sinking. I don't want to, Sophie said, and her voice was choked now. I don't want to, Dad. I don't want to be disappointed again. The words hit Edward like a punch to the gut. He closed his eyes, trying to breathe. Sophie, please. You always promised things would be different, Sophie continued, and now she was crying. You always said you'd spend more time with me, that you'd be present. But you never were. Never. Edward felt tears streaming down his face. Remember my science presentation? Sophie continued, her voice trembling. You promised you would be there. I kept looking for you in the audience the whole time. All the other kids had their parents there, but mine wasn't. Sophie, And on my 8th birthday? Sophie interrupted. You said you'd be home early from work. I waited all day, but you only came home after I was already asleep. Each word was like a stab to Edward's heart. He remembered every one of those occasions. I know, honey. I know I failed you, Edward said, his voice broken. But this time... No, Sophie said firmly. I can't. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't go through this again. The call ended. Edward stood still, holding the phone, staring at the dark screen. Anna came over and placed a hand on his shoulder. Edward? He dropped the phone on the sofa and buried his face in his hands. She hates me, he whispered. My own daughter hates me. She doesn't hate you, Anna said softly. You heard what she said. Edward lifted his face, his eyes red. She remembered every time I let her down. Anna sat closer to him. Edward, listen to what I'm about to say. She talked to you, that's a start. Edward looked at her, not understanding. What do you mean? She could have hung up as soon as she heard your voice, Anna explained. She could have asked her mum to answer, but she talked to you. She called you Dad. But she said she doesn't want to see me. She said she doesn't want to be disappointed again, Anna corrected. That means she still cares, Edward, that it still hurts. If she didn't care, she wouldn't feel anything. Edward shook his head. I lost my chance. I waited too long. Anna held his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. You haven't lost anything. Now show her that you're willing to fight. Show her that this time is different. How? She doesn't even want to see me. Then go to her, Anna said. Show up at her door. Show her you're willing to make the effort. Edward looked at her as if she had suggested something impossible. And what if she doesn't let me in? Then you stay at the door. Stay for as many hours as it takes. Show her that this time you won't give up. Edward was silent for a few minutes. Oliver babbled in his nest, oblivious to the drama. Do you really think I should? I think you don't have a choice, Anna said. If you've really changed, if you really want to be the father Sophie deserves, then you have to fight for her. Edward took a deep breath and stood up. You're right, I'm going. Now, before I lose my courage. Anna smiled and stood up too, picking up Oliver. We're going with you. Edward looked at her, surprised. You don't have to... Yes, we do, Anna said. Families support each other, remember. Edward felt a wave of gratitude for Anna. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Anna smiled. First, let's win your daughter back. An hour later, Edward was standing in front of a house he knew well. It was his mother-in-law's house, where his ex-wife and Sophie had moved after the separation. Anna was in the car with Oliver, giving him the space he needed. Edward looked at the house. There was a small bicycle in the yard that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Sophie had grown up, had experiences he wasn't a part of, but it wasn't too late. Anna was right. He could fight. Edward rang the doorbell. His ex-wife answered the door. When she saw him, her expression immediately hardened. What do you want here, Edward? I want to talk to Sophie, he said. She doesn't want to talk to you. You made her cry today. I know, and I came to apologize. His ex-wife looked at him with suspicion. You can't just show up here after 3 years and think everything will go back to normal. I don't expect it to go back to normal, Edward said. I hope it will be better. Just then, Edward saw Sophie appear behind her mother. She was taller, thinner, with longer blonde hair, but she had the same blue eyes he remembered, only now they were red from crying. Sophie, Edward said, his heart aching. The girl looked at him for a few seconds, then looked down. I don't want to talk to you, she said quietly. Edward knelt on the doorstep, getting down to his daughter's eye level. I failed you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was absent. I wasn't there when you needed me. I missed your presentations, your birthdays, your important moments. Sophie kept looking down, but Edward could see she was listening. But I miss you so much, he continued. Every day for the last 3 years, I've thought about you. About how you were growing, what kind of girl you were becoming. Sophie slowly lifted her eyes. You always said that, she whispered. You always promised it would be different. I know, Edward said, and I know that words alone aren't enough anymore. But this time is different, Sophie. I've really changed. And I promise I will never put you aside again. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Edward could see the war happening in her eyes, the desire to believe fighting with fear. How can I believe you? She asked, her voice trembling. Because I'm not leaving anymore, Edward said. No matter what happens, I'll be here. I'll be present. I'll be the father you've always deserved. Sophie hesitated. Edward saw her defenses begin to crumble, saw the love she had tried to hide begin to show in her eyes. But I've grown up, Dad, she said, tears starting to stream down. I'm not your little girl anymore. You will always be my little girl, Edward said, reaching out his hand to her. No matter how old you get. Sophie looked at his outstretched hand, then at her father's face. Daddy, she said, and her voice was that of a small child again. Yes, my love, it's Daddy. Sophie burst into tears and ran to him. Edward wrapped her in his arms, feeling how she was bigger but still fit perfectly against his chest. I missed you so much, Sophie sobbed. I missed you too, my love, Edward said, tears streaming down his face. I missed you so much too. They held each other for several minutes, both crying, both trying to reclaim 3 lost years in a single hug. When they finally separated, Sophie looked at him with eyes still full of tears, but also of hope. 6 Heart. Do you really promise? She asked. I promise that this time it will be different. Edward held his daughter's little face in his hands. I promise with all my life, he said. You are the most important thing in the world to me, Sophie, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Sophie smiled for the first time, a shy but genuine smile. I want to believe you, Dad. Then believe me, Edward said. Give me a chance to be the father you deserve. Sophie nodded and threw herself into his arms again. Edward looked over his daughter's head and saw Anna in the car, smiling through her tears. Oliver was in her lap, clapping his hands as if he knew something wonderful had happened. The lost bond between father and daughter was beginning to be restored, and for the first time in 3 years, Edward believed that maybe it wasn't too late to be happy again. The drive back home was a blur. Edward drove in silence, still processing everything that had happened with Sophie. Anna was in the passenger seat with Oliver sleeping in her lap, respecting his moment. Every so often, Edward would look in the rearview mirror and see Sophie waving from her grandmother's window, a shy but real smile on her face. They had agreed that he would come back the next day. When they arrived at the mansion, Edward parked in the garage and sat for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel. The house that awaited him was no longer the silent mausoleum of his regrets. It was a home. You did it, Anna said softly. Edward looked at her. She was smiling at him with genuine pride. We did it, he corrected. If it weren't for you, I never would have had the courage. They entered the house together. Anna placed Oliver in his cushion nest in the living room, and the baby continued to sleep peacefully. Edward went to the window and looked out at the garden where the snow had finally melted. The first signs of spring were beginning to appear. It was as if nature itself was being reborn along with him. How are you feeling? Anna asked, approaching him. Edward turned to her. Anna stood there in the living room of his house, with her blonde hair messy from the wind, her blue eyes shining with affection. She was there for him, supporting him, believing in him. Without a second thought, Edward took 2 steps towards her and wrapped her in a tight hug. Anna was surprised for a moment, but then she returned it, putting her arms around him. So thank you, Edward whispered in her ear. Thank you for everything. Edward pulled back a little to look at her, but kept his hands on her shoulders. If it weren't for you, I'd still be lost, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Still buried in that empty house, working late, running from everything that really matters. Anna looked at him in silence, her eyes shining. You changed me, Anna, Edward continued. You and Oliver. You made me remember who I really am. You made me a better man. Anna had tears in her eyes now, but she was smiling. For 3 years I thought my life was over, Edward said. that I would never be happy again, never have a family again. You proved me wrong. Edward paused for a moment, looking around the room, the lit fireplace, the messy cushions, Oliver's toys scattered on the floor. I don't know how to live without you, he said, turning his eyes back to Anna. These have been the happiest days I've had in years, waking up and knowing you're here, coming home to hear laughter, having family dinners. He took a deep breath, gathering all the courage he had. Anna, would you start a family with me? The words came out laden with emotion. Anna's eyes widened, clearly surprised. I know it might sound crazy, Edward continued. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I love you. I love you and I love Oliver as if he were my own son. Anna brought a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I want to take care of you, Edward said. I want to protect you. I want to wake up every day next to you. I know I'm not perfect, but I swear I'll try every day. You will always be my priority. Edward stopped talking, breathless. He had laid his heart completely bare. Anna looked at him with tears in her eyes, an expression of surprise and emotion. Slowly, Anna reached out and touched his face. Edward closed his eyes at the soft touch. Edward, she whispered. Anna said nothing more. Instead, she took his hand with both of hers, intertwining their fingers. They stood like that for a few seconds, looking at each other in silence. In Anna's gaze, Edward saw everything he needed to know. He saw love, hope, gratitude. He saw a woman who was willing to believe in love again. He saw her answer, even without words. Anna smiled through her tears and squeezed his hand tighter. It was her way of saying yes, of saying that she wanted to start a family too. Oliver chose that moment to wake up and let out a happy little shriek, as if he were celebrating. Edward and Anna laughed, still holding hands. The family neither of them had planned, but both of them needed, was finally complete. For the first time in his life, Edward knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. 3 weeks had passed since Edward's reunion with Sophie, 3 weeks of daily phone calls, visits to the park, and the slow but steady rebuilding of a relationship that had seemed lost forever. That Saturday afternoon, Sophie was visiting the mansion for the first time since she had left 3 years ago. Edward was nervous, tidying the house for the 3rd time. Anna watched him with an amused smile as she fed Oliver. She's going to love it, Anna said. Relax. What if she finds it weird? Edward asked, fluffing the sofa cushions again. What if she doesn't like you guys? Edward, Anna interrupted softly. Breathe. Sophie already knows we're important to you. She'll accept us because she sees that you're happy. The sound of the doorbell made Edward freeze for a second. Then he rushed to the door. Sophie was standing on the porch, holding her mother's hand to us, but when she saw Edward, she let go and ran to him. Hi, Daddy. Edward hugged her, still marveling at how easily she now threw herself into his arms. Then he greeted his ex-wife, who had agreed to let Sophie spend the afternoon with him. Sophie, Edward said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Just, there are some very special people I want you to meet. They entered the living room where Anna was sitting with Oliver in her lap. Sophie stopped and looked at them with curiosity, but without excessive shyness. This is Anna, Edward said, his voice full of affection. And this is Oliver. Hi, Sophie said, approaching slowly. Anna smiled warmly. Hi, Sophie. Your dad talks about you all the time. He said you love to draw and that you're the smartest girl in school. Sophie's eyes lit up. Did he really say that? He did. And he also showed me that drawing you made for him when you were 6, the one of the family at the park. Sophie looked at Edward, surprised. You still have that drawing? I do, Edward admitted. It's framed on my desk. The smile Sophie gave him in that moment was worth more than any professional achievement Edward had ever had. During lunch, they sat around the kitchen table. It was a simple meal, sandwiches and soup that Anna had prepared, but the table was filled with laughter and conversation. Oliver is so cute, Sophie said, making faces at the baby who giggled in response. He likes you, Anna said. He's usually shy with new people. Can I help take care of him sometimes? Sophie asked, looking between Anna and Edward. "Of course," Anna replied. "It would be great to have a big sister to help." The word sister made Sophie smile even wider. Edward watched it all, amazed. His daughter, Anna, and Oliver interacting naturally, as if they had always been a family. The house was full of life, laughter, human warmth. It was everything he had always dreamed of, but never knew how to build. After lunch, Sophie helped Anna give Oliver a bath while Edward cleaned the kitchen. He could hear the laughter coming from upstairs, Sophie teaching Oliver how to make soap bubbles. "Dad," Sophie said when they came down, "Anna is really nice, and Oliver is really like a little brother." Edward smiled. "Do you like them?" "I like them a lot," Sophie answered without hesitation. "They make you happy, right? You seem different. Lighter." Edward looked at Anna, who was holding Oliver and smiling at him. "They do," he admitted. "Very happy." A week later, Edward was sitting in the front row of the audience in a small auditorium at Sophie's school. She had mentioned during one of their calls that she would have a music performance and Edward immediately cancelled 2 meetings to be there. This time, he wouldn't miss it. When Sophie went on stage with the school choir, Edward spotted her immediately. She was in the center of the front row, wearing a light blue dress that highlighted her blonde hair. She looked older, more confident, but she was still his little girl. The music began, a song about dreams and hope, and Edward focused entirely on his daughter. When she started to sing, her clear, sweet voice echoed through the auditorium. Edward felt his chest tighten with emotion. In the middle of the performance, Sophie looked out at the audience, searching. When her eyes met Edward's in the front row, her face lit up with a radiant smile. She gave a little wave, and Edward waved back, his heart overflowing with pride. After the performance, Edward waited outside the auditorium with other proud parents. Sophie came running out, still in her choir uniform. "Daddy!" she yelled, running towards him. "You came! You really came!" Edward picked her up and spun her in the air. "Of course I came. You were wonderful, my love." Sophie hugged him tightly and whispered in his ear, You've changed, Dad. I love you." Edward closed his eyes, feeling tears stream down his face. "I love you too, Sophie, more than anything in the world." When he opened his eyes, he saw Anna approaching with Oliver in her arms. They had arrived at the end of the performance to support Sophie. "You were amazing," Anna said to Sophie. "Oliver clapped when you sang." Sophie laughed and tickled Oliver, who giggled and reached his little arms out to her. Edward looked around, his daughter in his arms, Anna and Oliver by his side, surrounded by other happy families. For the first time in his life, he felt truly complete. He had found something that money couldn't buy, that professional success couldn't provide. He had found his family, he had found love, and he had learned that it's never too late to start over. As they walked together towards the parking lot, Edward realized his life had gained a new meaning. It didn't matter how many important meetings came up, how many urgent projects appeared. His priorities were clear now. The greatest wealth wasn't in banks or investments. It was here, in Sophie's laughter, in Anna's smile, in Oliver's happy babbles. It was in love, in family, and in the courage to start over when all seemed lost. Edward smiled, holding Sophie's hand with one hand and intertwining his fingers with Anna's with the other. Finally, he was home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the